right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. See lots of folks joining us right now, and we will get started here in just a moment while folks are filing in. If you have just a few moments, go ahead and put your name, organization you're with, and your LinkedIn profile if you'd like to connect with others into the chat. Also, if you have already done your summer vacation or you have one coming up, feel free to share your favorite place to go or what you've done. It's always fun to get a sense of what people are doing over the summer as we are all getting a chance to do something exciting. So we'll begin here. I'll give folks another minute or so to file in, and then we will go ahead and get started. Vivek, you just mentioned that you went hiking as part of your summer travels.
Yes, I
Tell me just
did
a
with
little
my
about
two
that.
daughters.
Yeah.
Yes, with my two daughters. We just came back yesterday night, actually. And yeah, so we went to the Eastern Sierras, really. Well, it's Mono
Oh,
Lake
did
and that
you?
that that
You went to
area.
Mono Lake?
Yep. We hiked up to Mono Pass. Those are actually reasonably tough hike, like 9 miles total. You
That's
know,
awesome.
both the kids did not complain one bit. And the funny thing, I was telling them like, you guys didn't complain, and they were like, well, Dad, there's no point complaining because we know you're just gonna say shut up and do it. I'm like, all right, cool, fair enough. I guess that's one way of managing it. So
Yep, my kids are about the same, so that's that's awesome. All
that's right.
right. Um, ooh, Christine just back from a trip from Copenhagen. So, and Sonia, in a week we're going skiing, yes, and I imagine on Sunday you'll be cheering on your team. I will
That's
be
right.
cheering on the other team because I'm bitter after yesterday.
Funny.
All righty. Well, thank you, everybody. And Seamus, thanks for the kind words and for submitting your question in advance. We actually were just talking about how that was a good question. So, okay. So just want to make sure that everyone can see everything. And I think we are all good to go. All right. Well, welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are talking about employee experience in the age of AI, where we are and what's changing. Many of you I know, some of you I don't. I'm Stacia Garr. I'm co-founder and principal analyst of RedThread Research, and I'm joined by Vivek Bhaskaran, who's the CEO of QuestionPro. And so we're thrilled to have you on to talk about this new research and to get your perspective on all things EX today.
Awesome.
So to get started, those of you who are here probably know who we are, but in case you don't, we are RedThread Research. We're a human capital research analyst advisory firm. We have a research membership. We focus on education, community advisory, all the good stuff. And we focus in a number of areas: talent management, L&D skills, people analytics, and people tech, and kind of all the spaces in between that. And employee experience kind of covers all of that. And so we're excited to talk about that today. In terms of our conversation for this morning, afternoon, wherever you are, we've done kind of very quick introductions, but I'm gonna give Vivek a chance to do a slightly more proper introduction here in just a moment. And then we're gonna talk about employee experience and how it's changed. We actually, oh, is it? Thank you guys for the commentary. Is that any better? On the
Yeah.
screen, I don't know why that other screen came up, but some days that's the tech that you get. Thank you. That is why we have a very active chat. So you all can tell me when I'm messing up. Thank you. But so we will talk about employee experience. We're also going to talk a little bit about what I call people experience, which is the way that we're actually thinking about employee experience space right now. Then I'm going to share some brand new data that nobody's seen on the state of the employee experience tech market, or people experience, if you will. And then we'll move into that conversation with Vivek. I'm going to try and keep my section to roughly 15 minutes or so, so that we can really have a nice, engaging discussion with Vivek. So with that, Vivek, I would love for you to introduce yourself, kind of your experience in this space, what QuestionPro is, how you all came to be, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. I'll keep it under 2 minutes. Let's say under 1 minute. My background in software and technology. I came to the States back in 97, 98. I went to I did my undergrad at a Mormon university called Brigham Young University in Utah, and then I moved to Seattle. I started QuestionPro back in 2005, actually. So been doing this for a while, from 2005 to 2010. I ran it. Then I did a couple other startups. Most of them failed. Then in 2015, I came back to run QuestionPro. I've been running it since then. So from a company perspective, we are about $40 million in revenue globally and about 300 employees globally. That's kind of where we are as a company. And from a product perspective, we have three different kind of lines of business. Number one is consumer consumer insights and market research. Number two is employee experience. Number three is customer experience. So we kind of divide our products into three different buckets, and that's what I've been doing for the last, I guess, 20 plus years now. So
Great, great, great. And I think, you may have heard us chatting a little bit, or Vivek randomly lives a few miles from each other. So it's always kind of fun to get to see somebody else and who is here from the Bay Area. So thank you for that. Okay, let's think. Sorry, I don't. Apparently, I'm having odd. It's appropriate, right? But we'll go ahead and start with some of our thinking here on what people experience. So, oh, John, you're here. Hi from the North Bay. Yes, good to see you. So we have started calling employee experience people experience, and there are a number of reasons for that. And so I want to anchor us there before we launch into this conversation with Vivek on what we see as being people experience. So there are a couple of things I want to call out. First is that we're now using that word very explicitly. And the reason for that is when we think about who is in our organizations today, many of our bigger organizations have a very sizable population that is not an employee. Those folks are not W-2 folks. They could be contractors. They could be part of a vended spend or services, et cetera. And while we're not here to get into the legal implications of how we treat people, we do know, though, that these people are doing a sizable part of the work in our organizations. And thus, we should probably have a bit of a more expansive view on what we're thinking about as experience, particularly if those folks are, walking in the same door, scanning their same badge, maybe a different badge, but scanning it at the same place, and also experiencing our technology. So that's kind of why we are orienting much more around this word of people versus employees. And then the second part of this is, what do we mean by experience? And this is something we wrote a paper on a few years ago. We're actually in the process of updating this paper. So I want to share with you kind of how we think about what is involved in experience. And we see there as being 8. So the first one is what we would just say is the work. And I'll give you some definitions here in just a minute. That's the heart, this is like why you get paid. You come in to do the work. Second is really what we call foundational people structure. So these are the basic things that you have is really to have folks working for the organization. Expectations and feedback are the expectations the organization has of the workers or the people in their organization, as well as the feedback. But it's also the other, what are the expectations and feedback that those people have of the organization more broadly? There's kind of a element to that. For talk about communication as being of the experience. How is communication work between organization and the folks within it? Culture, there's lots we can say, but that's obviously a key part of experience. Your manager and your leadership, your development, connections, and relationships. So if we put some things to that, looks something like this. Now who are here in the on the webinar, you'll get of the recording, so you don't necessarily screen grab this. I know there's a lot here. The thing here is that there are a lot of elements, obviously, with experience that we have, and we uh, about this is that need to be all of these concepts together as we're thinking about experience. And then the other component of this, and I see your comment, William, I'll make a response to that here in just a moment. The other component about this is a lot of times we hear when people talk about employee experience, they talk about, oh, these moments that matter. I think that moments that matter is a shorthand way that doesn't really encompass everything that's involved in experience. And so the way we think about it is that you can have transition experiences or daily experiences. Those transition experiences are often what we think of as those moments that matter. Or you can have digital experiences and physical experiences. Now, of course, the line is being blurred with this now with AI and agents and all the rest of that. But fundamentally, the relationship or the interaction with the digital experiences tends to, or with the agents tends to still fit in that digital experiences space. So if we build all that together, it looks something like this. And I know I'm going through this rather quickly, but I just want to kind of help you all think about this is how we think about experience, just to kind of give a fulsome definition here. So we have these digital transitions or transitions enabled digitally up here in the top left. Daily digital experiences, regular physical experiences, and physical transitions or transitions enabled by physical environments. All of those can be part of experience. And so if we lay it all together, it looks something like this. If we think about what overall experience looks like. So I know there was a comment from William, and then I'm going to give Vivek a chance to jump in here if he has any comments. So William, you said, doesn't culture encompass most, if not all of the others? I think that is certainly true. But part of the way that we have been trying to kind of think about this is as an worker or an employee, how do you experience your work environment? And in that way, culture is just one component of it. I don't think that most employees, if we go into kind of some of the IO psych definitions, culture is the end result of all the decisions and interactions and experiences you have in the organization, process, tech, et cetera. I think that's reasonable, but I'm not sure that most employees or work or folks in the organization experience it that way. So we called it out separately so that we can kind of think through those elements all together. So Vivek, do you have any thoughts or comments on this?
Just really quickly, I think at least I'll speak to QuestionPro internally, like our own kind of like employee experience kind of modeling. Realistically, I think growth and development has been one of the key pillars of what people want out of the workplace. Realistically, right? So obviously cash and everything else combined, but I think we've kind of identified growth and development as kind of one of the stronger pillars in this kind of ecosystem. I mean, obviously, all of these things are important, manager relationship and all that stuff, right? So I think career growth development, I mean, growth and development's career growth, kind of like, all of the wow. And Sanya has done a bunch of research for us internally, and that has been a key driver, at least in terms of our thinking, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the growth and development and that being tied into manager and leadership, the folks that you work for and with every day,
Yep.
absolutely critical. So then let's move a little bit to talking about how employee listening, employee voice, employee experience, whatever word you want to use, has changed. We've seen a few things. So if we had to kind of like divide this into Taylor Swift like eras, there was really kind of the early era was this consulting run survey EX era, right? And so many of us saw those surveys. And may have even worked at some of those consulting firms that did those surveys and the like. Now, then when we saw some of the software providers like a QuestionPro, like a Qualtrics, a Medallia, et cetera, who came into this space, it was really designed to disrupt those consultants and to say, hey, like, you don't have to work just with them. We've got a much more self-serve / simpler, certainly more timely way to do this work. And so that is what we have kind of been in until relatively recently, is this SaaS run survey era. And now we're in this, what we'd call this continuous listening EX era, or if you're using our language, PX era. And that is really much more about how do we get information much more quickly and do something with it. But I think that the thing that's key here is that it is not as much of that point in time and that event driven as what has as now where it can be much more continuous and not just survey driven. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But these are kind of the ways that we're thinking about the changing of the space over time. The other kind of structural shifts that we are seeing as we think about particularly the impact of AI in this space are three things. So the first is that survey administrator job. If we think about the role of the person responsible for experience, a lot of times their job has been just to administer the survey, make sure it goes out, make sure it comes back, make sure we get the results and that everyone has the results. And that is where it stopped, right? And that now, so much of that work can be done just by the tech. Not saying we don't need oversight and human in the loop, of course we do, but so much more of it can be done by the technology. And so that role of survey administrator, we think is really obsolete. It is, as Joy just commented, it is about what do we do with it now? That is what where the magic increasingly is happening. And that's what we're seeing broadly in the market from the messaging from the vendors. That's what we're hearing in our surveys from folks who are using these tools. Is it's like, okay, that's great. I got the data, but like, what do I do now? And how do we show that it's an impact? We also know that AI can act without a human interpreting, in some instances, a human even being involved. And that has its pros and cons, right? And so we can talk to that. And then the final thing I want to talk about, because I think we probably don't talk about it quite enough in our space, is some of these tools that we build to understand what's happening, to protect trust, can actually erode it, right? We need to be careful as we're moving toward this space of continuous listening, that it isn't continuous Big Brother listening, this sense of like we're all being monitored and watched and all the rest of that. And I think this goes a little bit to that point about the fire hose of insights, and is what we're doing really to collect insights and do something, or is what we're doing really to collect data and monitor? And that is a very important distinction that we need, that I think it's only going to get more important over time, that we need to be thoughtful about. Joy and Kate, I see your comments. We will definitely talk to them. Let me just get through this little section here on the market, and then when we go into the discussion, we'll definitely get there. So when we think about the market, what does it look like? So historically, it has been primarily comprised of survey providers. And so this is based on our people analytics tech data that we are in the process of now publishing off of. There's another group of vendors that are culture, connection, and relationships analytics platforms, which you can see there on the left. We've got what we call just kind of EX platforms and comms, so much more about that communication element. And you see, like a ServiceNow in there. And then we're seeing, kind of well-being and resilience of that being a part of this whole employee experience technology space. But as you can see, historically, the majority of folks in the space have been survey providers, whether those are annual surveys, those are pulse surveys, those are weekly surveys, whatever it is. That's what most of the vendors in the space have been doing to date. The market itself has changed quite a bit too. So the market is growing, but it's at a much slower pace. Again, this is brand new data from the People Analytics Tech Study. And what you can see is that while the market, at least according to our estimations, is roughly a $5.3 billion market, the growth rate of that market has slowed. And so that can result in a lot of different behaviors, let's say, from the vendors than when the market was growing at 50%. year on year. And so I think it's important, and we talk a lot about this in the research, and I'm happy to go into it more if you have questions about it. But it does mean, and this is why it's relevant to you all, it does mean that what you can expect from your vendors is going to be different. The way that they go to market is going to be different. The way they serve is going to be different. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as you are working with your vendors. This slowing down also can create some real changes in what feels like is happening in the market. And so some of the headlines, particularly recently, as money has gotten more expensive and PE changes have happened, can feel like a lot, right? It can feel like stability isn't necessarily guaranteed. Medallia's been in the headlines a lot. Qualtrics has been in the headlines a lot. SurveyMonkey has been in the headlines. Lots of folks have been, because of their financing structure, have been in the headlines. And so that's resulted in a lot of questions. I'm not going to comment about these individual vendors, but what I will say, though, is that even though it feels like things are pretty unstable, or it could feel like, particularly if you're at one of these, using one of these solutions, what our data actually shows is that it's not that different what's happening in the employee experience market from an ownership perspective compared to what we see overall in the people analytics tech market. So if you look at this, the inner circle is the EX vendors ownership, and you can see on the bottom it starts mostly we've got one creditor controlled, but growth equity, PE, private, etc. Starting with that purple, and then on the outer circle you can see all the people analytics vendors ownership. And so when we think particularly about PE, which is driving some of those changes on the previous slide, it's actually not that much bigger of an ownership chunk of the market than the others. So what I'm just trying to say, and I feel like a lot of our work is just like trying to calm people down. Back to my Taylor Swift, we need to calm down. That's kind of what I'm saying here is like, this is not, yes, it can feel like a lot, but it's going to be okay. We're all going to get through this. Okay, I've got just a couple of other quick things, and then Vivek will turn over to our conversations. A couple of other changes in the market. We see that the EV vendors are not expecting to grow as fast as they used to. This chart, I think, shows in pretty strong relief going from 2022 to 2026, the percentage that said that they expected more than 31% growth. Those at this point tend to be small vendors who are expecting this growth. Some of your startups, most other folks have moved into a much more sustainable level of growth. We also find that the EV vendors, the employee experience vendors, now say that they serve HR leaders and executive leadership equally, and that is a change that has been building over time, but it is very, very present now. And then obviously people managers and people analytics leaders are also the same. A couple of other things regarding AI. Most vendors say they use Gen AI for listening and text analytics. And 57% said that they use some sort of agentic AI to support this type of work. However, what's interesting is they don't necessarily offer explicit agentic AI capabilities writ large. So there's very limited use of agentic AI within the work. In the technology that you're getting. So if someone is saying to you, hey, we got a ton of agents who are doing blah, 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 ask a lot of questions, because most of them are not, no matter what their marketing says. The other thing to think about is the pricing. I've actually got a piece coming out on the end of the AI subsidy in HR tech. Hopefully that's coming out next week. And you can see here that some of the vendors, 29% say that they're doing a usage-based fee or a data volumes fee. This is different than what we're seeing more broadly in the HR tech market, where much more of them are moving towards a consumption model, like in the HCMs. So if your vendor is doing or is offering agents, ask a lot of questions, particularly about pricing and how you're going to get charged for it. And then the final thing to ask about here is around how they're going to support you with ethics. So what we have seen is that for vendors, when they're talking about their own approach to ethics with regard to AI, they have seen some pretty notable improvement over 2023 or 2024. Sorry, that's the light gray here. But for customers, look at what has happened. It is like fallen off a cliff in terms of how vendors are supporting customers when it comes to AI and ethics. And so you either need a very strong internal approach or you need to be demanding support from your EX vendors when it comes to AI. So that was a big old data dump. I'm sorry. But we did want to get this information out because it's brand new. And I think it is a nice backdrop for our conversation with Vivek. So, all right, I'm going to pull down the screen share so we can kind of see y'all a little bit more directly. And we will launch into a few of the first questions. So, Vivek, I wanted to talk actually first with you about this this topic of you all do CX and EX, right? And so can we start maybe there and kind of share some of what you're seeing from CX, how it's coming into EX, and if you have any kind of commentary on what I just shared, you know, how it might fit into that. Let's start there, and then we will make sure that we get to the questions that were submitted before and the questions that have come in.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about CX, a lot of the CX is continuous listening, right? If you think about it, like if you go down to the basic tenets of voice of the customer, of any voice of the customer program, it's like every interaction is measured, every transaction is measured. Every time you take an Emirates flight, you'll get a survey. Every time you go to, you could say it's good, bad, or ugly. Every time you take an Uber, you actually, in theory, it's a very short survey, but it's a 5-star rating. You give it a rating. Yeah. And the data, point I'm trying to make is some signal is being collected at every interaction, right? Now, can that same thing be replicated in the employee experience side? Probably not. Like not every single interaction, has a transaction modeling that way. But the need for, at least the want and the need for capturing signals is high. At least on the customer experience side, and that's a big part. At least a big part of our business is based on helping our customers capture those signals in the moment of. And on the customer side, it's kind of moment of truth, moment of reality. Transaction happened. You buy a car, you buy something. There's a finite transaction. The employee experience side doesn't have that same kind of transaction element, so it's kind of like difficult to kind of completely kind of do apples and apples realistically on that one. At least that's kind of that's at least our viewpoint.
So maybe let's that ties in well to a question that we got in advance from Harsh, and I hope he's here, which was, how do we see employee listening evolving from surveys to this richer, more AI powered signal collection?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you step back and look at surveys as a construct, right? Surveys as a construct was invented, 30 plus years, 40 plus years ago, as a mechanism to capture signals at source, right? So like, all right, here's what I think. And we did not have, 40 years ago, we did not have the capacity to capture all the signals and then distill it. So what we said was, let's put the survey in front of the respondent, distill all the signals into a manageable set of elements, and then capture it and analyze it, really, right? So surveys, if you think about it, originally started in psychology and social science. Realistically, is like trying to capture what's going to how people are thinking, feeling, and trying to distill that down. So that's how, frankly, everybody's been running for 30 plus years in any context. So today, I would submit that kind of like physical barrier of processing information has moved. And surveys were invented as a construct because we did not have the capacity to process 500 different signals. So we said, okay, we'll distill all these 500 signals into 10 or 15 manageable signals, and then we'll process it. So I think what's happening today is like people are saying, okay, look, can we actually process all these signals at destination, really, right? So like capture everything, and then we have the capacity to understand each and every response, each and every element, and then distill it, which you can argue it's text categorization, but they're all kind of like melding into the same thing. We do a lot of work in the market research side also. So like I said, there are three different components of the business. In the market research, we had a distinction between like, hey, qualitative and quantitative, really, right? That was like the big distinction. Like if you look at market research agencies, they're a qual shop or a quant shop, and sometimes they're a hybrid. And what's happening in the market research world is also very similar, which is like they're kind of combining together. They're saying like, hey, we can conduct interviews at scale, which means you can do thousands of interviews. And should we capture all the processing information or not? That's kind of that debate is going on. And frankly, there's a movement towards kind of capturing as much information as possible and then processing it, as opposed to stopping it at the source itself. So that's at least kind of that's what I think, and we are betting on the fact that more there is a lot of signals that are currently uncaptured, that the users are willing to give, but they're not going to give it in a way that you want it, right? So in structured format, they'll be like, hey, just ask me a couple of questions and I can give you answers, what I like, what I don't like, what I hate, what I don't hate, but it has to be open-ended. And then you can have a lot of kind of LLMs and processing on top of that to say like, hey, look, can we extract signals from this corpus of data? So that's kind of at least the shift that I see across the board, not just in the EX side, but obviously on the CX side, clearly on the CX side, and then on the market research side also.
So I want to now kind of go to Joy and Kate's questions about how we do something about this, right? And so the beauty of surveys, to wax lyrically, if you will, about them, is you had a hypothesis, right? You came in, or at least when I've designed surveys, I came in, I said, I think X thing is happening. I'm going to test for X thing. And if A is happening, I'm going to do, it means blah, blah, blah. If B is happening, it means blah, blah, blah. And there was a clarity between design, test, result, action to some extent, or at least if you did it how you're supposed to do it. Today, it's like, tell me everything, bring it all in. What's it mean? And then it's no wonder, right, that it just feels like we're getting blasted with information, because that is what's happening. We didn't come in with like, okay, we think these things are happening and therefore we'll go do these other things. So in that world, how do you see people really kind of dealing with that fire hose of data and going from like all this stuff to, okay, here's the action that we should now go take and how we're going to take it and who's going to do it? Like, how do you do that with so much?
Yeah, so the information with surveys, you've kind of filtered out the information to a large extent to kind of what your hypothesis was, really. That also yields a gap, realistically, in my mind at least. There's a gap between, there are certain questions that have never been asked, and you can't get an answer to a question that you've never asked, really.
Right.
So I think so in my mind, so when you open up the fire hose, you need to create a separate kind of data structure and corpus that you say like, how do you mine the fire hose, really, right? So like and the expectation that you can mine the fire hose the same way the way you mined a survey data fire hose, or it's not a fire hose, but at least a data structure.
It's at least a garden hose. I mean,
they're two separate ones. So you have to kind of like, my point is that you have to create a different set of systems to manage kind of the larger corpus of data. Right, the same way, like if you think about it, like in the customer experience world, most companies actually have two different programs running, one structured and one unstructured. And the reason we do it that way is because the unstructured modeling and output is it's much more difficult, realistically, and you have to have a good sense of what you want out of it, right? So you can ask LLMs to analyze 10,000 transcripts, really, but you have to kind of prompt it correctly, prompt it in a way that you want the output to be, okay, I want to look at these 10,000 transcripts, but with this lens, right? I want to look at these 10,000 transcripts with this other lens, right? So now you have all these other ways of looking at the data, whereas the previous construct was, hey, we have 10,000 responses, here's the output. So it was a unified and simplified model. But now you could have 10,000 interviews, and frankly, you can ask the LLM to go through 10,000 interviews with one lens and have another lens and another third lens. So now you have, so it does create the complexity of how do you kind of like, what kind of prompts you write in terms of analyzing the data. So you actually almost like, you would say like, look, it is more powerful, but also your intellectual capacity to analyze the data also has to increase at the same time, to say like, okay, it's not, it's not as, so I think my theory at least is that, we should capture as much as possible and then put it in a different data set model to say that I want to analyze it completely differently, because it has exhausts, it has digital exhausts of varying caliber and varying degrees, from 10, let's say you have 1,000 employees, you have simplified questions, but you have more, you have a variety of different signals coming in. So you can capture more signals today, but you also have to kind of spend the time and effort in terms of managing and actioning on those more signals, really. So again, you could argue like, hey, maybe we don't even want to action those signals. We could not action on those signals. How do we categorize those signals? These are all problems that will get solved, and by technology, in my opinion, by tech, right? Obviously, I'm biased on this. That how do you kind of manage these signals? But I do believe that capturing those signals is going to be more important than saying that, hey, we can't process this, because that was the original idea behind surveys. Like, we could not like physically process that information, like just mechanically we couldn't do it. But today, mechanically you could do it. So therefore, we should take advantage of the fact that mechanically we can do it. Now, whether we whether all the tools get smarter and kind of structurally good over time, that will depend upon how we implement the tools, how we actually execute on that. So I'm not a lot focused on like, hey, what do you do with it? Because the outcome, it'll still be the same. Whether you use a survey or interview, you have to come up with an action plan. You have to come up with a game plan of like, look, this is what these guys need. And so now that thing is a second, I would argue that's a second equation over there. But what I'm arguing for right now is like your ability to capture more data should be leveraged, because that will give you additional signals that you potentially could not get just using a survey.
Okay. So what it makes me think of is, we lose the structure up front, right? But we can impose structure on the back end in terms of the analysis and the approach and all the rest of that. Just to tie this back to some of the questions, Kate said, what process do you recommend to identify which transition or daily experiences to gather signals on? And I'll give kind of my thought on this, and that is that you could ask the LLM or to give you information on and use that framework. Okay, this is how we define transition experiences. What insights do we have? What themes come up with regard to transition experiences? This is how we define daily experiences. What insights or themes come up with regard to that? What I think is important as we do this work, though, is one, it's very easy to say that because you didn't begin with the question in mind, that you're then going to bias your outcome, because it's like, well, of course you're only going to hear about, transition experiences because that's all you asked about. And so I think it actually raises the importance of decision frameworks, because otherwise you are only going to ask the questions you care about, and then anything else that might have come up, you're not going to see. So I think you still need that kind of structured thinking when it comes to analyzing the data. But as you think about it, though, like, what other keys or things should we be thinking about? Because we are fundamentally changing the way that we are looking at these data, and we do want to make sure that we're taking advantage of the full breadth and not letting our own biases like limit us to just looking at this one thing.
Yeah, if you think about it, when you expand the aperture of your signal collection, which is what kind of like at the end of the day you're doing, you'll start getting different types of outliers, really, right? So if you start getting different type, and then what do you do about them, and how do you analyze that is, frankly, a TBD question. I'm not sure that I have the answer to what you, but I do believe that you'll have different types of outliers in any data collection process and and frankly any analysis process. So what do you I am of the opinion that, like, hey, look, collect as much as data as possible, look at the outliers and see if there is any interesting information in the outliers available, which is traditionally not being able to do it, and then connect them to kind of business outcomes really fast. So now you can, I also believe that like the HR practice needs to get a little bit more connected to kind of business outcome process, really, which has happened in the CX space, for example. The CX space, people kind of collect a lot of data, but they're very, very plugged in into kind of operational outcomes, right? So it's almost like, think of it as the glue is there. So I think a similar approach to kind of EX, where there's a glue between like, okay, I am the manager of 10 or 15 people. Can I get really tangible outcomes out of this process on an ongoing basis? Can we design a system that says, look, if I have 15 people reporting to me, can I get weekly updates, monthly, quarterly, whatever it is, really, right? In somewhat of an automated way that helps me kind of manage and operate my team. So that's, I think that part can be kind of glued together, in my opinion. At least that part can be glued together in a more cohesive way. So that says like, look, I get what's happening with my team, right? Which is more important than the larger team. And nobody really cares about the larger team. What everybody cares about is my team, and say like, hey, is my team kind of glued together really well? And can this signal exhaust system give me information, really give me decisioning information, which is what happens in the CX world. If you think about it, like, okay, the product managers get direct access to the data sets and or information sets, really, right? So they're making they're making decisions on a daily basis. They're saying, hey, how do we make this product better? And here's all the signals that we are getting regarding the product, and that goes back to the product manager almost instantly. Whereas in the EX space, do we get that information back to decision makers, back to the managers? Let's say the manager of a particular business unit slash whatever scale you want to do it. I think that speed at which that information is going back has to be, in my mind at least, has to be vastly improved, so that it's near, as soon as we get the information, that we used to do it with dashboards, but now we can do it with many other different kind of mechanisms, including push notifications and this and that. Here's what's happening, and then get them vested into the process. So I think that'll yield a better, frankly, a better outcome for everybody, both the employees as well as the managers, because now they're plugged into this ecosystem in a more cohesive way. That's my opinion.
Okay. I want to go to a question that came in advance, because I think it ties in well here, and then we'll go to John's question about challenges with errors within LLMs. But what this question that was submitted in advance is, as organizations move from surveys to passive and AI-assisted signal collection, how do you ensure they are actually getting closer to organizational reality rather than simply collecting more data that reflects existing biases and power structures? So I would posit that through more continuous listening / data collection, you should be getting less bias in theory, because you are collecting more often. If you are collecting passively, in theory, you should be getting less bias because you're actually collecting what's happening versus just a perspective or opinion on it. And I would also say that point that I made a little bit earlier around frameworks, clear frameworks for analysis can help you address some of this. Do you have anything else that you would add to this on how you can, not get around the biases and power structures that may exist when doing the analysis, when coming up with the insights?
I think one of the greatest things employee experience does is anonymity, to get rid of bias, power structure. I think we have to be like, figure out a way to kind of like establish the concept of anonymity in exchange. People are trading anonymity in exchange of truthfulness or honesty. Let's put it that way, right? So the bias is gonna exist. People are gonna be scared about saying something, not saying something, right?
Okay, so anonymity.
So anonymity, in my mind, at least anonymity, and it can be, again, it's a tough one. I wouldn't say it's easy to get people to kind of speak truth to power and speak truth about what is going on. And I think the EX market has done a pretty good job in terms of kind of explaining and frankly believing in it, right? Like it's a little bit of a belief system, realistically. If you think about it, at the end of the day, like, when somebody says like, look, your data is anonymous, they either believe it or they don't believe it. That's it, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. So from a technical perspective, I'm pretty sure that everything can be tracked. I'll be straight with you. Like to say that you cannot track it is like it's like kind of like it's like saying like I'm going to erase something off the internet. No, you're not going to erase anything off the internet. That's it, right? Once it's out there, it's out there. So I think I would anchor on kind of building that trust with the within the ecosystem, saying like, hey, even if you're using kind of continuous listening and asking you to kind of give an exhaustive kind of response set, if we can say like, look, we are not going to either legally and or ethically, we say we are not going to identify you, therefore you can be pretty honest with what is going on, and there is no retaliation, repercussion, pick a verb for that. And I think that will help us. I think that'll help in the long run. In terms that has already helped, quite frankly. That is and on the survey side, but that also can help in any other reducing the bias, really, right? So
Yeah.
bias can be reduced if you say like, look, this is what I believe. It's what I believe, whether you like it or not. That's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, but I think it gets to back to William's point earlier, culture. It certainly gets to trust. Trust is um, probably the number one topic that we at Red Thread are talking about right now. We're talking about it with we have a briefing club, which is kind of our most senior members, and the things that they're hearing, we're hearing it in all of our conversations. This question of trust, and so it doesn't matter how many times you say something. If people have come to believe otherwise, it's a challenge, and no survey provider is going to fix that for you. Like that is a bigger culture issue that I think people need to have on their radar. Let's spend the last like 15 minutes really going directly at AI because we've got a ton of AI questions. So I want to start with John's because it actually ties in nicely to this concept of trust, which is how do you measure and account for the errors that an LLM produces? And I think he's meaning specifically when you're doing that analysis, you may get something that isn't totally accurate. I mean, I'll share. I mentioned just now the signal report. We have a database, and we're using AI to run over that to gather themes and such. And I will tell you, there's a lot of misidentified themes. We end up having to go back to the original transcript and be like, actually, this is what that person said, not that. So how are you handling this? Because you all are handling this on a much bigger scale than we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we are doing it, both from like, for example, we use AI for coding also. Like you'd say like, hey,
Yep.
it produces bad quality code, good quality code, really, right?
Yep.
What I call like guardrails and harnesses. That's kind of the key, right? We're still these errors, and errors in classification, for example, will happen whether one way or the other, realistically.
Yep.
So anybody that says like, well, my classifier somewhat 100%, like, well, actually it's not true, because it's going to happen. The question really is, how do you manage those classifications, manage those errors? You account for those errors to begin with, right? To say like, okay, we will have, for example, I'll give you quick examples, right? Like in the coding world, which I'm a little bit more intrinsically familiar with, like when AI writes some code, we have a secondary agents that look at the code again, right, and say like, hey, look, what you wrote, is it good, bad, ugly, really, right? And then we have 2-3 iterations around it with different types of LLMs. So we want to guarantee that. What the reality is, like, we cannot actually physically look at every line of code. That's a physics problem, really, right? So if you want to run this thing at scale and at some speed, we just simply cannot physically do it. But we can put guardrails. We can put secondary systems in play that says, well, this is not how we want to design something. This is the bad way of designing. Go back to the drawing board, come back with a better design, really, right? So you could apply similar constructs where you have different types of agents monitoring the output, right? And giving you some sort of a quality score, giving you like, okay, look, agent A or LLM A did this, LLM B can then kind of like supervisory. That's how most chatbots are frankly built on a very practical level. If when you're chatting with any chatbot, whether it's ChatGPT or anything, there's a supervisory agent that is looking at the transcription, really. And then if there is an error, the supervisory agent picks up, it starts doing it, and then there's a recursive loop, right? That supervisory, it has its own supervisory agent. So that's why these things can become very, very smart, because of the recursive loop that's there. So a similar argument can be made, like, when we are analyzing data, you can have a supervisory agent that looks at the analysis itself, right? So and then have a recursive model that way. So that's how I would think about it from a technical solutioning perspective. Is like, you have supervisory agents that look at existing kind of classify, let's say the classifiers. Let's take a simple kind of use case of classifying content, right? And then determining and independently determining a score regarding the classifier, and doing something about it. Like, if the score is below 80, then do something, and if scores above 80, let it go. Which is what we as human beings would probably do anyway. Like, we'd look at, like, hey, we'd take a sample and say, like, hey, look at the classifiers, and go through that process. So something like that would be my way of thinking about it.
I want to extrapolate that to a question that Mark just sent in actually a little bit ago, which is he said, after you gather and diagnose the signals, is there any decision criteria leaning more towards human first decisions versus tech AI first for efficiency / cost gains? I am assuming, knowing Mark a little bit, that what's inherent in there is like, how do we make sure that we're keeping the human first components within the set of recommendations versus just being like, hey, here's how you can handle this in a way that reduces costs. But I'm wondering if you could actually use the structure you were just talking about with kind of the super agent over the agents doing the analysis to even bubble up in the recommendations, like, okay, the agent, the overall, here's what's happening. You could, if you're trying to, maintain humans first, here's a set of options. If you're more focused on cost and efficiency, here's a set of options. And third option is, Goldilocks, a bit of both. So like from a structural perspective, to kind of make sure you get that breadth of potential solutions, is that, would that work? What do you think?
Yeah, that's how Claude is built on skills. For example, if you like, what are skills? Skills are guardrails around a particular construct, really, right?
Yep.
So if you look at Claude skills, it very similar approach. Like, you can have, because it's so contextual, you could have the same, you could have different recommendations, right, depending upon the context of this. And you can set up like, okay, this is the context now, and give us a recommendation again. So blanket saying that, well, those recommendations are dumb. Well, maybe because the context is not there. Simple, right? So just like human beings, right? The context is not there. But if you give LLMs enough context, the recommendations are going to be very, very on point. But to that context. So now you could have different types of context, really, right? Like, okay, look, this quarter we want to enable this quarter we don't want to enable this. So building that context map, building that context under which the LLM operates is the name of the game at this point. It's not like the LLM by definition is like, okay, you got some intelligence, but the context around that intelligence is not available. What is important for company A at this point of time is different than what, frankly, even for us, what at this point of time is different than what it was last year. Let's put it that way. As a company, we want to go in a different direction. We want to go in this direction. That's what we want to do as a company, which was frankly different than what we wanted to do last year, fundamentally. So to say that we're all the same no, it's not true. So now I have to empower our AI agents to actually understand that context, or to have that context to begin with, really, right? So that's what I would recommend is, like, think about the context, and your output from any LLM is vastly improved or not, depending upon the context. Simple, right? How much context you give to the LLM, or any LLM for that matter. It's not like, okay, this LLM is better than that. Like, well, that LLM has more context, and you give it more context. Obviously, the output on that would be 10x better. And so the point I would try to make is that the output is literally 10, 15, 20 times different. So it's important to understand, like, you cannot say like, hey, this LLM is better than that LLM. Well, LLM A got, your company's context much better. You give it. And you have to kind of like, you have to give the same context to every single LLM and put that process in play. So I think that's important to understand, and how to give that context is not, I won't say it's impossible, but it's not, most people don't think about it that much to say, hey, I have this data, I have to look at it through this lens, right? And the context is the lens.
Yeah. I will say though that, like you, I use a lot of different LLMs, right? And a lot of times I test one against the other with the same exact information that goes in them. And it's not just context which determines, but it's also the model that matches the task better. Like some models are just better at some tasks than other models. And so I think that's important for folks to keep in mind as well. I want to get to a question that was submitted in advance from Christine, who's here, and she asked a question about, as we think about scaling AI How do we balance community building and personalized experiences? So I'm wondering, have you thought about that at all?
In terms of community building, and I think personalized, I would say something like, as much as I love AI and everything else, I'll give you a quick example. I hate automated bots speaking to our Slack channels, for example. Right? I've
Uh-huh.
made it a case because we start. The reality is, I would use it, but people start ignoring it. People starting anything that's automated. People literally, start ignoring it. Realistically, right? If you get an automated email, you'll start ignoring it. You get it, so the point is, like, if you want change, you got to mix the automation with the human element, just to get people's attention. Simple. At the end of the day, we want to get people's attention. So if you say, hey, I have all the AI in the world and I'll send an automated email every Monday, I'm guaranteeing you that email on Monday will be ignored by nearly everybody. Simply
Mm-hmm.
put, right? Like, because everybody knows that's an automated email. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the content around that is massively kind of relevant, it will get ignored, really. So my kind of, going back to the community building, I think it's got to be a mixture of kind of like where people know that, like, this was, either hand curated or curated by a human being on the other side for my consumption. Even
Mm-hmm.
if that element is there, then the capacity to adopt and get it. You can get the data, using AI, but presenting the data using AI is, in my opinion, a pretty bad idea, because the adoption is going to be zero or nearly zero, very very low, which kind of defeats the purpose of the whole point of the exercise. If
Yeah.
adoption is zero, then it's kind of irrelevant, right? Even if you come up with the best idea, and nobody wants to do it because of the medium in which it was delivered. So I do believe that, having people deliver some of the content and still deliver some of the outcomes, is equally important in terms of how it's delivered, because of adoption, because of, absorption, really, on the other side.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of folks talking about, oh, what are the human skills and what are, all this stuff. And honestly, I am so tired of these discussions. But the thing that I keep coming back to is that, and it's not a skill, but it's like the values in the relationship, right? And so, like, you and I could have the same information in an organization, but if, you're the boss and you scan that same email and you come back and you say, to the team, this is the thing I found important. Even if everybody else had the same information, the reason they're going to pay attention is because of the relationship with you and power structure and all the rest of that, versus something else. And that's not a skill; it's just a fact of human existence.
Operations. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Doing operations. Yep.
yeah. Okay. I know we had so many questions that came in that we don't have time. We didn't get to. I want to just maybe wrap up with one question for you, Vivek, which is, we've got a lot of great folks who are here on the webinar, even still, as we're getting right here to the end. And if you had one piece of advice for them as they are moving into, this AI continuous listening world, what would that be?
uh Absorb, I mean, I think having tools and systems to absorb more information becomes the new reality. That's at least my viewpoint. I've seen that firsthand in the coding side, in the programming side. Like, programmers are not writing code anymore. Programmers are managing systems. So
Mm-hmm.
having harnesses and systems becomes more important. So it's going from tools to workflows is another way of describing this. Is to say, like, hey, everybody wanted tools earlier on, and now people are looking for workflows. Like, how do we solve the workflow end to end? So that's what I would say is like the more important element at this point of time, to kind of look at workflows and saying, like, okay, here's what I do end to end. How much of that can be automated? How much of them do I need to be part of? How much of that can be kind of eliminated slash automated, however you want to describe it. That would be my guess.
Okay. Vivek, thank you so much.
All right.
I want to just share with folks, we previewed some of those people analytics tech uh, insights. We are doing a full-on webinar on it July 29th. So if you want to join us for that, Priyanka and I will be doing that session, and you can sign up via that QR code. And also, if you want to just stay in the loop with what we're doing, we've got a free starter tier membership where you can access today's slides If you want to learn more about our membership, go ahead and check us out here. Obviously, if you want to learn more about QuestionPro, go to questionpro.com. And I'm sure that Vivek and his team will be very happy to talk to you and talk to you about some more of these things. And I just want to say thank you to Vivek. Thank you to all of you for attending. The warm comments in the chat. Really appreciate that. And you have also given me at least some new ideas for some things to write about. So in terms of questions, so I appreciate that as well. And for everyone who's here, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Stacia. Bye.
Thank you, Vivek. All right. Take care, everybody.